Hey friends, got another great book to be adding to your bookshelf. Here with Canopy International, we're about equipping you to do the work that God's called you to throughout the world and have a great book that does exactly that. So today for the Integral Mission bookshelf, I'm reviewing Leading Across Cultures by James E. Plueddemann. This was put out by InterVarsity Press Academic, and this is a fantastic book when it comes to engagement. We have some great resources that are specifically focused on cross-cultural ministry. What I love about this book with Plueddemann, and you hear it right in the title, this is about leadership, which means we're talking about some best practices in leadership, but we're also talking about what that looks like in that cross-cultural setting where there's power dynamics and there's all these other things to kind of factor in. And he just does a fantastic job. Specifically, when we think about cross-cultural ministry, Plueddemann is really starting from this baseline acknowledgement that there has been essentially an amateurization of global missions, right? All sorts of people can be going out on intercultural missions teams, right, and going to do the work. And essentially, there's an acknowledgement that that's not necessarily a good thing, right? We want people to be engaged globally, but we don't want people to be committed to not being equipped or committed to being amateurs, right? We should be excellent in everything that we do, especially when it comes to global mission. And starting from that acknowledgement, Plueddemann is really building a case of what it looks like to actually be excellent, to not be amateurs, but to be equipped for the work that God has called us to in global missions. One of the quotes that he kind of reiterates over and over throughout is that there's nothing as practical as good theory, and nothing as impractical as practice without theory or theory without practice. One of the things that we've talked a lot about on Think Global, Do Justice is about that gap between policy and practice or implementation, right? We have these theoretical ideas, but how does it work out in real life? And Plueddemann is really building out what that can look like, and specifically in that cross-cultural piece, right? So again, he's bringing in some of those difference in power dynamics, especially for him being a Westerner who worked for many years in Nigeria, as well as other thinking, how does this apply to other missional contexts, right? Those cross-cultural pieces. One of those examples would be around evangelism, right? We think about the Apostle Paul and the fivefold ministry. Evangelist is one of those things, and you can see that even happen in cross-cultural ministries. I think of my years in Tanzania, where you can have a big crusade led by a bunch of wazungu, as we call them. But is there a connection to discipleship? Is there a connection to the local church? And unfortunately, sometimes that disconnect does take place, right? So whether it's something like that or whether it's other biblical examples of leadership, many of which, if we're honest, are not really good examples. There's more bad examples of leadership in the Bible, more like this is what not to do. He dives into all of those types of things, but he's going to walk us through a lot of the cultural differences, views of time, shame versus guilt, other of those cultural dynamics. You guys think of Hofstede and some of the work that he's done, kind of mapping leadership onto those things. And it really helps us avoid pitfalls that we can't see because we have different cultural glasses on. So Plueddemann is really equipping us to be very proactive. When I teach global and biblical leadership, this is a book that I use. My friend got it to me a few years ago before I ever taught from it. And it just kind of sat there, but it is one of those books where there's just a wealth of knowledge. So today's book is Leading Across Cultures by James E. Plueddemann. Highly recommend it. If you are engaged in cross-cultural ministry, even if you are just thinking you're going to go out for a short time, this book has a lot to say. So check out Leading Across Cultures as you continue to devote yourself to integral mission.